So what we're going to do is go ahead and get started then. So welcome everybody to the Gardening with Vision Impairment webinar. Today's webinar comes to you from the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin. The Council is a private, not-for-profit, community-based organization. Our mission is to promote the dignity and independence of the people in Wisconsin who are blind and visually impaired by providing services, advocating legislation, and educating the public. You will have an opportunity to ask questions or offer comments at a midpoint and toward the end of the webinar. To do that, if you have a microphone and want to speak your question, press and hold the Control key and a raised hand will appear next to your name. If you can't see the raised hand, you will hear a blip. If you do not hear that blip, someone else has the mic, because only one person can talk at a time. But stay in queue, and when it's your turn, you will hear the blip, and then you can talk. If you don't have a mic, type your question or comment into the box in the middle of the right side column and press Enter on your keyboard. The question or comment will appear in the public chat text box above it. I'll start recording the webinar momentarily. This allows for archiving. Later today or tomorrow, you will receive a link to the archived webinar via email. You can review the webinar or share the link with others. The archive version will remain available until mid-June. Attached to that email will be Barb's handout from today's webinar. If you need to leave before the end of the webinar, simply close your web browser or go to the File menu and down to Exit. So let me introduce today's speakers. Barb Kresge supervises the Horticultural Therapy Services Department at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Barb's background spans a wide range of clinical settings, including psychiatric hospitals, the Hines Veterans Administration Hospital, skilled nursing facilities, public schools, and pediatric rehabilitation. She has incorporated plant and nature-based interventions in her work in each of these settings. She holds a master's degree in health sciences with a concentration in neuroscience and an undergraduate degree in occupational therapy, as well as voluntary registration as a horticultural therapist. Judith Rasmussen has studied French, Spanish, and Arabic. She's a massage therapist and enjoys cooking, pottery, and growing orchids. Judith joined the council staff in 2008. She is a program assistant and manages the council's Braille transcription. So I'm going to turn off my mic and Barb will pick up and start talking a little bit about why gardening.
Good morning again, everybody. It's really delightful to be here with you. And we're going to open with the most essential question that I want everyone to give a little bit of thought to, because it goes to our motivation. The big question is, why do we garden? Why would anyone garden? But answer it personally for yourself. I'm going to give you a number of possible reasons, and then I'll share with you my own reason. But really the focus is your reason. Some people garden for the results. They really focus on the end point. Beautiful flowers, vegetables that they can eat fresh, and that they can control how they're grown, whether it's organic, chemical, not chemical. And some people are highly motivated by landscape improvement, how their home looks both to themselves and to other people from the street. Another reason might be for health reasons. The way you truly know what you're eating is once you've grown it yourself. There's some research that definitely tells us that there's more vitamins eating fresh vegetables. And another health reason for gardening is because it's really good exercise. It's as effective as most workouts. A reason we talk about a lot here at the Chicago Botanic Garden is gardening for mood, to improve one's mood. And this is no small thing. Our mood and our stress level are directly related to health, to physiological changes, actual, physical, not just all in your head changes. Positive things about gardening are that it's a feeling of challenge and accomplishment. Perhaps your entire garden isn't exactly the way you want it to look, but you have succeeded with something new or something that's been challenging to you before, and that's a true feeling of accomplishment. Research also tells us that being in nature, and when you're in a garden, you're in a subset of nature, being in a garden is very predictably stress reducing. Even if you aren't going there for that purpose, your blood pressure will drop, your heart rate will normalize, chemical measurements of stress are reduced, and chemical measurements of the feel-good hormones, endorphins and dopamine, actually increase in a natural setting. Some people garden for the pleasure of sensory experiences, exploring plants with texture or particular fragrance is very motivating, very, very pleasurable. For people who are finding that the pleasure that they take in through sight is diminishing or is becoming less important, emphasizing those other qualities can really compensate and can become a true source of joy. So it's important to identify your own personal reasons. It helps you to set realistic goals. I would tell you that my reason for gardening is because I believe it would be related to mood. I just enjoy being out there. I would rather mow the lawn than vacuum the living room any day of the week. And I'm not a particularly accomplished gardener. I've always said that I'm really glad that the Chicago Botanic Garden didn't come look at my yard during the interview process, because I am not a gardener compared to many of the people here. But I enjoy it, and therefore it's very much worth doing. If you're a new gardener, I strongly suggest starting with something that's within realistic control, and that is likely an elevated garden bed or a container that brings the plant material within easy reach. If you're an experienced gardener and your vision is changing or has changed significantly since the last growing season, just acknowledge to yourself that it's going to take longer and that you're going to have to develop new habits, and be realistic so that you're not terribly disappointed. There's no sense doing the work without a feeling of gratification. Let's talk about our next subject, which is gardening safety. I am not seeing the slide, so if Jean is able to put up the next slide, simply know that it's the topic matter of gardening safety. Thank you, Jean. There's a few cardinal rules when we're gardening, and the first one is so very important that I would like it to have strong emphasis. Many gardeners use chemicals, chemical fertilizers, chemical weed killers, chemical pest deterrents, and if that is you, please, please, please be sure that those containers are labeled very clearly in the type of label that you can read most easily. Please work with a well-sighted person to do this. This is critical. I would also recommend storing those chemicals in a very specific place, organizing them by what you do not want to use casually. when we're talking about organization, part of safety is also organizing your tools. This just makes it easier, but it also is safer if you know you're picking up a sharp tool, a digging tool. You want to know the difference instantly. And another safety measure is to paint each handle with a bright color so that it doesn't get lost against the background of grass or soil. A bright neon green, orange. This has the other advantage of being able to get them back from your neighbors when they borrow them. Think about how you use your tools and how, if you can devise a system to bring them all out together for your gardening session, reducing the number of times you go back and forth to your storage facility can optimize the time that you spend gardening, and it's also part of safety. So some options are a gardening apron, a container such as a 5-gallon bucket that carries your tools, hand tools particularly. There are sort of aprons that go over 5-gallon buckets that have pockets in them, and that expands your carrying ability. Here at the Chicago Botanic Garden, in our enabling garden, someone devised something I thought very, very clever. They used a golf bag cart, you know, those 2- or 3-wheeled carts that you drag your golf bag around the golf course with, and they put on a container for their gardening tools, and it made it very easy to trail behind them out to where they're gardening. So that's about what I've got on your tools, but another important aspect of safety is to make sure that you are protected. I think most of us now know how very important wearing adequate sunglasses is. Can't be emphasized enough. But think of your skin as well. Wear a good hat, wear sunscreen every time, and know that there's now some clothing that has both sun and insect protection built into the fabric. There's a resource for that on the resource list that follows this presentation. And that's a very easy way to be sure skin is protected. Another element to be careful of is to be sure that you use gloves. Again, on the resource list, there's some nitrile gloves that allow very good sensitivity, but gardening without gloves means that you can get even a small scratch or injury in your skin, and the older we get, the thinner our skin gets. So that scratch or cut or injury of any kind can emit enough bacteria to get a nasty infection, and it's best to prevent that. Some people are accustomed to using electric tools, and if your site is compromised, I would be very careful not to have corded electric tools. I would favor battery-operated ones, and even then, you must be very, very careful. I think even preferable to battery-operated tools are hand tools because you have much greater control with those. All right, moving on to the next topic, and if you have questions about safety, we'll be having a pause soon, and feel free to ask me those questions then. Let's talk about getting ready to garden or preparing the garden bed. Many of us who've been gardening for a long while garden in the ground, at ground level. We cultivate the earth, which means we turn it over, we mix in our fertilizer at ground level. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but I am going to make a strong recommendation that every single gardener consider raising at least some of their gardening in an elevated bed, which is a bed that's up on legs. Sometimes it's called a table bed or a pan bed. It has area underneath for your knees to go. You can raise it to sitting level, or standing level. Again, I have resources for those. Or simply, the easiest way to raise gardening to a comfortable level is to put it in a container. If your site is compromised, the distance from your eyes to the soil, if you're gardening at ground level, can be prohibitive. And then you're down on your hands and knees. And I don't know about you, but for me that gets less comfortable every year. But if you're doing this, if you're gardening at ground level, consider using a cultivator as opposed to turning the soil over with a shovel. A cultivator is a tool with a roller at the end of it, and it has separate rollers that operate at different frequencies. Each roller has spikes or tines that poke into the soil, break up clumps, and turn over the top couple of inches. Cultivators are preferred because they expose fewer weed seeds, and they simply have to be rolled over the soil back and forth, as opposed to specifically knowing where you're digging into the soil and turning it over. Be sure to keep your ground level bed narrow enough that you don't need to step on it in order to tend the plants. So if you are kneeling and reaching, that's about a distance of approximately 24 inches from each side. So if you can reach into the bed from both sides, you can have a bed 48 inches wide. But if it's against a fence or another obstacle and you can only reach from one side, that's 24 inches. Determine the layout of your bed. If you have more than one, you'll want the walking area between your beds to be as smooth and trip-free as you possibly can make them. And decide on how you want to lay out your rows, or if you indeed want rows, because we'll talk about some other options. Short ones across the width of the bed are easy to control. Many gardeners are used to using stakes and string to make their rows straight. But if you use something like landscape pins or tent stakes and you push them deep into the soil so that the top of the stake is level with the top of the soil, and your string to guide your rows is actually resting on the soil, this will allow you to work in your accustomed way, but you won't be likely to walk into stakes or strings and trip yourself quite as easily. Be sure that your boundaries of the bed has something you'll recognize before you step into the bed. So you would have some sort of edging or plastic snow fencing, something low and maybe brightly colored so that you know before you're stepping into your bed. Here's some interesting ideas if you don't necessarily want to garden in rows, and frankly I think these ideas make it much easier. One way is to use a grid pattern instead of rows. An easy way and very fast way to lay out a grid is to purchase a piece of lattice that's about the same dimension as your bed. Lay it flat on the ground, not standing up, but flat on the ground, and secure each corner with landscape fabric anchors pushed down to the level of the soil. Now you have a grid pattern completely covering the soil of your bed, and each open section in the grid can hold one plant. This particularly works well if you're planting in transplants or plugs. That way, if you get that transplant right into the center of your open area, you can confidently know that everything towards the edges of that open space in your grid is a weed. You can weed around the desirable plant because it is in the center. Another option is to use circles and make a circle garden. I don't mean that the bed has to be circular, but if you collect plastic cartons from large-size yogurt or cottage cheese or ice cream, and you cut off the top 3 inches or so, you can embed those into your garden bed, whatever shape your garden bed is, and just leave enough of the rim poking up so that it forms the boundaries within which you put your transplanter plug. Then all the area between your circles and at the edges of your circles can be weeded because your desirable plant is right in the center. And an interesting concept is if you have trouble with slugs in your garden, and they can do an awful lot of damage, if you put copper tape around the edges of your circle so that any slug would have to cross that copper in order to get to your desirable plant, slugs hate that and will tend to stay away. So that can be a double benefit to you. Another way, if you're still not sure you're going to know your desirable plant from your weeds, is to just stick a marker such as a popsicle stick beside your desirable plant. Just be very careful if you do that not to poke the popsicle stick into the roots. Put it nearby, but not in the root zone. All right, let's move on to planting. Planting, that's one of the most hopeful and optimistic parts of gardening. It means that you have a great belief in a wonderful future. Planting is just so much fun. Here's a very nice idea for dealing with seeds, which can be so small and so hard to control when you're outside. They blow, they move, but if you prepare them inside first, you can have a lot better control. What you'll want to do is to use a strip of either paper toweling or even toilet paper, and you use a strip if you're making rows, or just use a little square of the same material if you just want a single seed or single small cluster of seeds. At each interval that you want to place your seeds ultimately in the garden, put a drop of water-based glue, such as Elmer's school glue. Put your seed in the glue and let it dry. Now you have a very easy to manage way to transfer those seeds, spaced at the appropriate intervals, into your garden. Both the glue and the paper will disintegrate into the garden, and the seed will have all it needs to grow in the right place. If you're using transplants instead of seeds, be sure that you have prepared your bed, including how you're going to mark placement before you plant anything. You're in danger of allowing the transplants to dry out, especially in the root zone, if you're trying to space things out and measure during the time you're also planting. So get everything ready first. Make sure, as everyone who gardens knows, that your transplant is planted so that the original root ball, the top of it, is even with the top of the soil. Not too high, not too low, and check it again after you water in. So let's talk a little bit about tending, and this is going to be the last section I'll talk about before we take a little break for questions. So now would be a good time to type in any questions that you might have, or to think of them if you'd like to use your microphone. When you're tending a garden, there's a few things that generally have to be done. You need to water, weed, you need to take care of pests, and ultimately you get to harvest. So, watering. A good rule of thumb is to learn to discern the moisture level of your soil by touch. There are meters that'll ding and ring and click when you have enough moisture. But part of the joy of gardening is that tactile pleasure of feeling how things are going. So insert your finger up to at least the first knuckle and check for the feeling of dampness in a few separate sections of your garden or container. It'll take a little bit of experience, but not too much. You'll be able to discern the difference between soil that's kind of damp and chilly the way it is in the morning, and you'll be able to tell that from soil that is truly damp. Always check before watering. Check for whether the area needs water. Too much is as detrimental as too little, so don't water by a schedule. Water by how the soil feels. Water thoroughly, and you'll know that you're done if the soil is dampened below the knuckle level, or if you're in a container with good drainage and drainage holes, if the water is running out of the holes, then you can stop. When you're weeding, gloves may reduce the sensitivity of your fingers, but I really still recommend that you use them. Some weeds, are, as you know, nettly or spiky, and those things can get into your fingers and really cause more trouble than it's worth. You can also use what's called a short-handled cultivator, and if you know the area that's free of desirable plants, you can use that cultivator and just roll over that area, and that'll take care of any weeds that are just beginning to sprout. It's sort of like hoeing does, but with a much more controllable method. Pests can be challenging. Whether you see or don't see, pests are just a challenge. And for this, I would recommend that you remove your gloves if your plant doesn't have any thorns, and check the stems and the underside of the leaves very carefully with your fingers. Since you can transfer bacteria or pests from one plant to another, keep a bucket of soapy water and rinse your hands well between touching each plant separately so that you aren't transferring. You could also use thin disposable gloves that you can change between plants. And really this hand method as opposed to chemical method is the way to start. Finally, you get to harvest, and knowing when to harvest your fruit and vegetables or when to pick your flowers takes a bit of practice. You're going to have to really tune into your other senses, touch and smell, but oh, what a pleasure to do so. And remember that the fruit or the vegetable usually releases from the plant more easily when it's ripe, so you can test it with a gentle tug, and if that doesn't do it, wait another day, because it's really great to get it at the peak of ripeness. We have some time now, and I'd be happy to take any questions. I'm going to turn off my mic so that I can hear other folks, and I'm ready to take any that you might have.
Okay, there were a few hands that were raised who had questions. If you don't have a question and there's a hand raised next to your name, that means that the computer thinks you want to ask a question, and then you're blocking somebody else from being able to ask a question. So I'm going to turn off my mic, and I think Michelle and Roxanne were the two hands that were raised. So if either of you all have questions, when I turn off my mic, if you go ahead and ask yours.
Remember to keep your mic on the whole time you're talking.
Okay, there is a question in the chat area, and so Barb, the question is, what are some hardy flowers and or plants for the garden that you would recommend?
Okay, this is Barb with some recommendations of hardy flowers or plants. The interesting thing is that this depends, of course, what zone you're in. Southern Wisconsin is in zone 5, or I believe they might have changed it to closer to zone 6 now because they recently changed. And northern Wisconsin, I don't know, but I'm sure it's a different zone. But generally speaking, in the Midwest, there's some old favorites, and they're old favorites because they are reliable. Those would be things if you have a sunny area such as marigolds or echinacea, which is the cone flowers, all varieties of cone flowers. There's a strong recommendation that we all plant some cultivar of milkweed. And the reason being that if enough home gardeners have a small patch of milkweed going, we can support the life of monarch butterflies, which are so very threatened because their habitats are disappearing. If you have a shady garden, you know there's nothing better or easier than hostas. And look into the world of hostas. They come in so many sizes and colors now. And then also the fern family. I'm going to look at some of these other questions that are up. And we have someone endorsing the golf cart suggestion, and I like that. And we also have a comment that a hoop hoe is really easy to use. And you can get close to plants without cutting them off. That's a great suggestion. A hoop hoe has at its end exactly what it says, a hoop with a thin edge that cuts the weeds off at the soil level, but it's a little bit easier to control than the traditional hoe. And another question we have is that when using cut-off containers, so in other words, when I was talking about the circle garden and you use containers for marking them off, how deep should the container be to be able to grow tomatoes or peppers? If you're using a cut-off container to mark the area, a depth of 2 to 3 inches is plenty. That allows vegetables, which have far deeper roots, to spread out underneath that area. The point of the container circle is just so that you can locate the main stem of that plant. The roots need much more area to spread out in. I'm going to check and see if I see any hands. I'll leave the mic open for someone else who might like to talk. Okay, I see no more questions, and we're about on schedule to continue to our next part of the presentation. And this might be a little less familiar to some of you, but it's very important. I would like to talk a little bit about ergonomics. Ergonomics is, you know, a $10 word for a very easy concept. It's how you use your body most effectively and most efficiently. Effective and efficient means preventing injury and pain. If you are in true pain the day after gardening, you're doing something wrong. You should feel that you've had a nice, comfortable workout, but pain is always a warning signal. So really consider how you're positioning yourself and what tools you are using so that you can avoid that extreme pain. Ergonomics becomes important as our vision changes, diminishes, or just alters in some way, because remarkably, vision has an awful lot to do with balance and our ability to locate ourselves in space. If you have any doubts, try closing your eyes and standing on one foot versus standing on one foot with your eyes open. With eyes closed, it's far harder for every single person. So realize that everyone whose vision is compromised has a somewhat increased chance of having a fall. And avoiding a fall takes a lot of concentration and brain power. So you want, if you want that concentration and brain power available for gardening, you really want to make sure your space is as devoid of hazards as you possibly can, so that you aren't always on guard against falling. And also see if you can provide yourself with some stable things to hold on to in case you feel a fall coming on. And please make a habit of having a cell phone, an emergency call system, or someone close by in the off chance you have an emergency. Those things can make all the difference between just being a nuisance emergency and a big deal. You don't want to be left out in your yard for any length of time. Just as you've done inside your house, outside your house, take care of cracked pavements, make your walkways as easy as you can for movement. You can define smooth walking paths over lawn area. And if you have stepping stones, I would favor removing those for a continuous path. Stepping stones are lovely, but they are easy to catch a toe on. One way to be sure you have something to hold on to if you feel a fall coming on would be to have a very sturdy garden chair in the area. You can either kind of pull it behind you, and it serves the same purpose as grab bars do in a bathroom when you're getting out of the shower. If you're gardening at ground level and you kneel down to the ground to garden, there's a wonderful type of kneeling pad, and I have it in the resource area. It has two handles on each side, which can help you get up and down smoothly. When that pad with its handles is flipped over, those handles become legs of a stool, and it becomes a stool that you can sit on and garden from. It's really a very clever and handy tool to have. They even sell accessories for it that hold some of your tools. So that's a strong recommendation I have for any gardeners who work at ground level. And using the stool works very well if you're working at a raised bed. If you purchase or are using a raised or elevated bed, make sure it will not tip if you use it to catch a fall. If we're falling, it's nature, it's self-preservation to reach out and grab something. If you grab a flimsy plastic garden bed, it's going to come down along with you. So there's some very nice ones. I also have them in the resource list, made of cedar, very sturdy, and that is a strong recommendation I have. Also, think about the sharp corners. Think about rocky outcroppings in your garden, and think about low-hanging tree branches. Get rid of all those obstacles if you can. If you have sharp corners that you can't eliminate, for instance, on your raised bed, and put your pride aside, go to the store, look at some products designed for child-proofing because they fit on edges very nicely and might save you from a fall leading to stitches. You can get creative too. You can use pipe insulation to pad edges, and if you have a wide edge, think about slitting a pool noodle. You know, those long foamy things that people use to keep afloat in a pool? You can slit that and use it lengthwise to slip over an edge. I've even known people to do that if they have metal edging that defines garden areas, because that metal edging is murder to fall on. Another element of ergonomics is to realize that tools are an extension of our body. They increase our ability to lift things, to move things, and to manipulate things in our world. A general rule to keep track of is the less the tool is extended from your body, the better your control is going to be. A long-handled tool used in a standing position is difficult to control, especially if you don't have vision guiding you. For instance, think of a hoe or even a rake. The business end of that tool is far away from your eyes, and it's far away from the arms that are controlling it. And that's the most difficult tool to control. That's another reason that raised or elevated beds can be an advantage. You can use short-handled tools and really increase your control with that. Let's see. Oh, one more interesting thing about tools is that they are designing more and more tools that are labeled ergonomic. And that means that someone has given some thought to how they're designed, but some are more suited than others, and it's a very individual thing, so try it out before you purchase. Since gardening while you're visually impaired will require adjustments, make one more adjustment this year and try at least part of your garden in a raised bed or container. You might be surprised at how many types of plants you can grow this way. We have on our webinar today avid gardener, Judith, who does quite a bit of container gardening. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Judith so she can explain how this works for her.
Okay, I guess I'm on now. I love plants and I love gardening. And just a little background, I grew up on a farm where my dad raised a lot of crops, so I was around plants. I love working in dirt and I don't mind getting dirty. So working with plants and working with dirt makes me feel that I have a connection both with other living things and also with the earth. Plants are both, I think, wonderful because some of them are edible and also for their beauty, whether they have flowers or not. Their foliage and all is just wonderful. Lots of textures. So even if you can't see, there are things to notice about them. Where I live in an apartment, I can't have pets. So plants give me something that I can take care of and feel that I have some control over. I can watch them change, feeling new leaves come out and new blossoms. And their company, I have several plants, devil's ivy, a night blooming cereus, and some other kind of, I don't even know what its name is, but it has huge bright green leaves. And they've been my companions for over 30 years and moved to many different apartments with me. So it's also very satisfying to garden when you see the changes in the plants and that they're growing well. And it's a source of pride when someone says, oh, you have a green thumb and your plants are really beautiful. That's really a nice feeling. Now that I can't see, I do exclusively container gardening, and I do it year-round. So I have indoor plants, house plants. I have 25 of them at the moment, and in the summer I put containers out on my little porch. And I'm going to give you a few examples of the plants that I have and that I find are pretty easy to grow and that I might suggest. The indoor plants, I have some flowering ones. Among them are 7 orchids, 5 of which are blooming at this moment. Also a hibiscus that blooms usually in the early summer, an African violet, and Christmas cactus. And all of these I can tell easily apart because their leaves feel different, or both in texture and in shape. For example, the African violets, you may know, have kind of a velvety feel to their leaves. And also, this is not a blooming plant, but another one that I find really nice as an indoor plant. It's called a Puerto Rican oregano. I don't think it's edible, and I wouldn't want to put it in my mouth because it has velvety leaves like the African violet. But it's wonderful to go along and touch by accident or on purpose because it emits this really wonderful herby smell. So all of my plants I can tell by the textures, of the leaves, the flowers, and all, and that's just, I don't need to see to do that. Okay, and in the summer, I have plants out on my porch, as I said. Some of them are edibles, and among the edibles are herbs. And I usually grow basil, chives, cilantro, oregano, and parsley for sure, and then sometimes some others. And again, all of these have different shaped leaves, so they're easy to tell apart. And especially the basil, cilantro, and oregano have those wonderful smells. You can just stick your nose into the leaves and tell what they are. If you're not just going by the leaf shapes, you can tell by their smell. I also grow usually at least one cherry tomato plant, a bell pepper, a dinosaur kale, which is sitting out on my porch right now and should come back if the winter wasn't too harsh for it. And last year I started growing sweet potato, and the reason being it's growing in a pot, so I never really got a sweet potato to eat. But they come in lots of different colors, and they're a very nice, luxuriant vining plant. So it was a pleasure to have that plant on my porch. It's nice to be able to go out and pick those things, like a handful of herbs, tomato, take them in, rinse them off, eat them either fresh in a salad or use them for cooking. And sometimes, if I'm sitting out on my porch and I know there's a ripe cherry tomato, I might just grab it, and it's nice and sun-warmed, and just eat it without even rinsing it off. And the reason I feel comfortable doing that is that I don't use any chemicals on my plants. I also have some flowering plants that I grow out on my porch, and among them are geraniums. They don't have the most fragrant smell, but they do have a distinctive smell, so you can tell them apart, and also the texture of their leaves. And I can still remember colors, so I pick very vibrant colors that I know passers-by on the sidewalk will be able to look up and say, ooh, isn't that pretty? So I might pick a magenta, a salmon, a red, orange, so different colors of geraniums. And those will keep blooming all summer long. As you pick off the dead ones, they'll just keep blooming and blooming. So they're a wonderful plant to have. Also, I usually have at least one lantana, and the reason is that the butterflies are attracted by those. And then, let's see. A friend recently gave me a yellow primrose. It's inside right now, but I'm going to put that out in a pot when it's warm enough to have plants out. And a coworker here at the council gave me a package of marigold seeds from her garden last year, and I put some in a pot and grew them. I have some left, so I'm going to plant those again. I also had a pot of cosmos last year, and I may just, when I go to the plant store, I may find out what other kind of flowering plants would make nice ornamental, eye-catching on my porch. As I said, I don't use chemicals, so I'm going to tell you the few needs that I have to plant my garden, to have my garden. Varying container sizes and shapes, a watering can, appropriate potting medium, and when I'm saying that, for example, the orchids, if you have them, you probably know that they need to have a special soil that has some bark or wood chips in it. Also some kind of hand digger, and either some seeds to start from scratch or some plants to transfer. And that's about it for the needs for my garden. My container garden on the porch is really nice. I can reach all the way around my pots into them. I can turn my pots so they're getting sun from different directions. And also, I don't have to do a lot of weeding. It's an upstairs porch, and rarely I will get a weed, but it's probably been blown in or bird has dropped it, but I don't have to do a whole lot of weeding. So I recommend it to any of you that you can garden whether you can see or not, and just plant something and enjoy. Thank you.
Well, Judith made a very good endorsement, I think, for container gardening. Just not having to do a whole lot of weeding, that alone would sell me on the whole concept. So all of us here would really encourage you. We hope you begin or continue gardening because it can bring you so many health benefits and joy to your life. Personally, I'd like to extend my invitation for you to visit the Chicago Botanic Garden. We're located in Illinois on the very north end of Cook County and a few miles west of Lake Michigan. There are 26 display gardens and nature areas here, and all of them have their own charms, but of course I'm partial to the Buehler Enabling Garden. That's the garden that is managed by my department. It's 11,000 square feet of raised beds. It has hanging baskets that come down on pulleys. It has vertical gardens, and everything is designed to be universally accessible. Almost every day you'll find garden volunteers there, and they're happy to provide a tour or answer questions. And right next door to this garden is the Sensory Garden, and that is a non-stop paradise of sight, sound, touch, and smell. I truly hope that you have the opportunity to visit soon.
Okay, we have time for a few questions. There's a couple questions in the chat area, one of which is mine, because I'm very bad at this. Some tips for watering container gardens, and then also a question of, speaking of container gardening, what are your thoughts of using a metal water trough for cattle? So, Judith, do you want to take one or the other of those, or?
Okay. I check the soil to see how much water. I also, most of my pots out on the porch have holes so the water can run through, so that's the way I can tell I'm not getting too much. Speaking of that, I did notice a problem last year because we had so much rain, and some of the pots that had attached bottoms, I walked out there after a big rain and found that essentially everything was swimming. So I had to do a lot of emptying of the water. So that's something to be careful of in the kind of pots that you have. But I usually just check the soil and see if my plants need any watering. And also, the other thing I do is I touch the leaves. If they're starting to droop, obviously they need some water. Should I turn the off?
This is Barb, and I would endorse everything Judith said. That's what I would do as well. I'll tell you one little tip that I find makes watering a container easier, especially if you have a container that's sort of packed and overflowing with plants, is to use a watering wand, and that'll extend the reach of your hose the length of your wand, and they make them from about 12 inches to maybe 36 inches, and you can poke that right into the center of the container without putting your hand in there and water until the water comes out the bottom. The other question was about using a metal trough. They're designed for cattle, to provide water to cattle as a raised garden. And I've seen that done. I would do a couple of things. I would drill holes if needed in the bottom so that there's drainage. And I would also, I would find out what that metal is before I planted food crops in it. You know, crops take up everything that's in the soil, and I simply don't know what the trough is made of and whether that would leach into the soil and then come up into your plant. But you know, you have to be careful. There's things such as lead which can be sucked up into the plant and that you would not want to be eating. If it's ornamental, it could be just gorgeous and you would have no worries that way. Just give it some drainage. Any other questions? Okay. There is a list of resources that Jean is going to put up, so it will be available to everybody, and that provides a lot of resources to things that we've referred to today. I'm going to sign off. I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity to talk with everybody, and thank you for your attention so much. Bye-bye now.
Okay, my thanks to today's speakers, Barbara Kresge and Judith Rasmussen, for giving us lots of good gardening ideas. And also thanks to all of you for attending today's webinar. We are already planning the next webinar, which will be on telephones and making them more accessible for people with vision impairment, and this will be on June 11th. So you'll be seeing more information about that webinar as we get closer to that time, and we hope that you will be able to join us. We do ask that you'll take the short survey. On this slide there's a link to a SurveyMonkey survey that's just 8 or 9 questions to give us a little bit of feedback about the webinar. The webinar will be archived, and I will be sending out an email once we have that archive ready to go. Also, Barb's resource list will also be attached to that email. The archived webinar will be available through June 15th of this year. So here in southern Wisconsin, we had a little bit of rain this morning, so that should certainly turn things green and make us all start to think even more about getting out there, clearing up last year's brush, and thinking about what we want to plant. I know some people have already done lots of work around that. I'm just starting. So have a good afternoon, and thanks a lot for coming.